Sedition? Yes, sedition. Literally, they're talking about sedition. What are we talking about here? So apparently,
that word. That's a family show.
Yeah,
You don't know the word sedition,
right? So all of us are in danger when anti-government speech becomes sedition, and that's what I wanted to talk about here. This is in Off Guardian, which is an outstanding publication. John Nisha Whitehead, in this case, Kit Knightley. They've done a lot of great work, so big fan of theirs. Support them. Censorship, okay, and they quote Lenny Bruce, and this is kind of a long one, but again, this is all about government censorship and what can we do and what's happening here. And this is they go back to Lenny Bruce. If you can't say fuck, you can't say fuck the government, right? And they'll come back to this later. That anti-government speech has become a 4-letter word, right? In more and more cases. And there's a lot of also in the UK. The government is declaring war on what should be protected political speech wherever it challenges the government's power, reveals the government's corruption, exposes the government's lies, and encourages citizenry to push back against the government's many injustices. Right. Indeed, there's a long and growing list of the kinds of speech the government considers dangerous enough to red flag and subject to censorship, surveillance, investigation, prosecution. Hate speech, conspiratorial speech, treasonous speech, threatening speech, inflammatory speech, radical speech, anti-government speech, extremist speech, etc. Hi, Carl. Now we've got our FBI handler listening. Thanks. Mm-hmm. Things are about to get even dicier for those who believe in fully exercising their right to political expression. We know this, right? Indeed, the government's seditious conspiracy charges against Stuart Rhodes, founder of the Oath Keepers, and several of his associates for their alleged involvement in the January 6th Capitol riots puts the entire concept of anti-government political expression on trial. Interesting. We're not supporters of the Oath Keepers and what they did on January 6th. I want to make that clear right here. Right, I'm not a fan, but I understand. And they were also led and stoked, and it's a whole thing, but it was not a thing. It's a riot and enacted during the Civil War to prosecute secessionists. Seditious conspiracy makes it a crime for 2 or more individuals to conspire to, quote, overthrow, put down, or destroy by force the U.S. government, or to levy war against it, or to oppose by force and try to prevent the execution of any law, unquote. It's a hard charge to prove, and the government's track record hasn't been the greatest. And there's links showing how and why. So it's been almost a decade since the government tried to make a seditious conspiracy charge stick against a small Christian militia accused of plotting to kill a police officer and attack attendees at his funeral in order to start a civil war, and it lost the case.
Damn.
Yep. Although the government was able to show that Cudery had strong anti-government views, the judge ruled in U.S. v. Stone that, quote, offensive speech and a conspiracy to do something other than forcibly resist a positive show of authority by the federal government is not enough to sustain a charge of seditious conspiracy. Whether or not prosecutors are able to... Right, but, well, whether or not prosecutors are able to prove their case that Rhodes and his followers intended to actually overthrow the government, the blowback will be felt far and wide by anyone whose political views can be labeled anti-government. All of us are in danger. What? Yeah. In recent years, the government has used the phrase domestic terrorists interchangeably with anti-government, extremist, and terrorist to describe anyone who might fall somewhere on a very broad spectrum of viewpoints that could be considered, quote, dangerous. This is where it gets into us. The ramifications are so far-reaching as to render almost every American with an opinion about the government who knows someone with an opinion about the government an extremist in a word, deed, thought, or by association. Yep. You see, government doesn't care if you or someone you know has a legitimate grievance. It doesn't care if your criticisms are well-founded. And it certainly doesn't care if you have a First Amendment right to speak truth to power. What the government cares about is whether what you're thinking or speaking or sharing or consuming as information has the potential to challenge its stranglehold to power. Why else would FBI, CIA, NSA, and other government agencies be investing in corporate surveillance technologies that can mine constitutionally protected speech on social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram? Right? According to the Department of Homeland Security's Terrorism Bulletin, Threat actors seek to exacerbate societal friction to sow discord, we know this, and undermine public trust in government institutions to encourage unrest, which could potentially inspire acts of violence. Okay.
Acts of violence.
By the government's own definition, America's founders would be considered domestic extremists for the heavily charged rhetoric that they used to birth this nation. Great. Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin would certainly be placed on a terrorist watch list for suggesting that Americans should not only take arms, but should be prepared to shed blood in order to protect their liberties. Quote, and now we're gonna get into the founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson. What country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. That's a very famous, of course, quote. Observe Ben Franklin, quote, democracy is two wolves with a lamb voting on what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb contesting the vote. Oh, okay. Thomas Paine, Marquis de Lafayette, John Adams, and Patrick Henry would certainly be labeled domestic extremists for exhorting Americans to defend themselves against the government if it violates their rights. Quote, it is the duty of the patriot to protect his country from its government, insisted Thomas Paine. When the government violates people's rights, Lafayette warned, insurrection is for the people, and for each portion of the people, the most sacred of the rights and the most indispensable of duties. Again, I'm not advocating insurrection. However, I understand. And again, pointing out that the founding fathers would have agreed. John Adams cautioned, a settled plan to deprive the people of all the benefits, blessings, and ends of the contract, to subvert the fundamentals of the Constitution, to deprive them of all share in making and executing laws, will justify a revolution. And somebody was saying that we were not advocates for revolution this week. I'm certainly not an advocate for violent revolution. I don't want to see that happen. I don't necessarily know of any other.
I'm not either.
I don't necessarily know of any other way that it happens other than that. But I'm not really a fan or a supporter of that.
Never.
Okay.
I would never. What?
And who can forget Patrick Henry with his ultimatum, give me liberty or give me death? Conduct your own experiment into the government's tolerance of speech that challenges its authority, and go see for yourself. Stand on a street corner or in a courtroom, at a city council meeting, or on a university campus and try denouncing the government with some of the founders' rhetoric. Boy, that would not go very well. Right? My guess is that you wouldn't last long before you get thrown out, shut up, threatened with arrest, or at the very least accused of being a radical, a troublemaker, a sovereign citizen, a conspiratorialist, or an extremist, or maybe you'll just get fined. It's happening all across the country. Get the fuck out of here. Yeah, true. Really happening.
Yep.
In Punta Gorda, Florida, for instance, 2 political activists were fined $3,000 for displaying protest flags with political messages that violated the city's ordinance, banning signs, clothing, and other graphic displays containing words that the city deems indecent. What did they say?
Florida's always been bad with indecency. Yep.
Coming to the defense of the 2 activists, the Rutherford Institute challenged the city of Punta Gorda's ban on indecent speech as unconstitutionally vague and a violation of the First Amendment safeguards for political speech that may not be censored or punished by the government. We won the first round, with the Charlotte County Circuit ruling against the city, noting that the ordinance was designed to cause the preemptive self-silencing of speakers whose messages are entitled to constitutional protection. Okay, that's a good thing. In other words, as the court recognized, the ordinance was clearly designed to chill political speech, which is protected under the First Amendment. You see, the right of political free speech is the basis of all liberty. Sure. No matter what one's political persuasion might be, every American has a First Amendment right to protest government programs or policies with which they might disagree. The right to disagree with and speak out against government is the quintessential freedom. Agreed. Every individual has a right to speak truth to power using every nonviolent means available. This is why the First Amendment is so critical. It gives citizenry the right to speak freely, protest peacefully, expose government wrongdoing, and criticize the government without fear of reprisal. Right? Sounds basic enough.
Yep.
Americans of all stripes would do well to remember that those who question the motives of government provide a necessary counterpoint to those who would blindly follow where politicians choose to lead. Thank you very much. We don't have to agree with every criticism of the government, but we must defend the rights of all individuals to speak freely without fear of punishment or threat of banishment. Including a former president, by the way, even though I don't agree with what he's saying or don't like him. This is how freedom rises or falls. So again, as Lenny Bruce said, a lifelong champion of free speech, if you can't say fuck, you can't say fuck the government. Lenny Bruce, who of course was a foul-mouthed, insightful, irreverent, and incredibly funny comedian, was one of the First Amendment's greatest champions who dared to speak the unspeakable about race, religion, sexuality, and politics. We should have had a little Lenny Bruce quote, but I was afraid, clip, but I was afraid to get the MCA.
Clip.
As a Village Voice writer, Matt Hentoff attests, Lenny Bruce was not only a paladin of free speech, but also a still penetrating, woundingly hilarious speaker of truth to the powerful and the complacent. He sure was. He made people uncomfortable. He died in 1966, but not before being convicted of alleged obscenity for challenging his audience's covert prejudices by brandishing unmentionable words that, if uttered today, would not only get you ostracized, but could get you arrested and charged with a hate crime.
Mm-hmm.
Hentoff, who testified in Bruce's defense at his trial, recounts that Lenny used to say, what I wanted people to dig is the lie. Certain words were suppressed to keep the lie going, but if you do them, you should be able to say the words. Not much has changed in the 50-plus years since Bruce died. In fact, it's gotten worse. What we're dealing with today is a government that wants to suppress dangerous words. Words about its warring empire. Words about its land grabs. Words about its militarized police. Words about its killing, its poisoning, and its corruption, free Julian Assange, in order to keep its lies going. What we are witnessing is a nation undergoing a nervous breakdown over this growing tension between our increasingly untenable reality and the lies being perpetrated by a government that has grown too power-hungry, egotistical, militaristic, and disconnected from its revolutionary birthright, quote-unquote. And the only therapy is the truth and nothing but the truth. If the government censors get their way, there will be no more First Amendment. There will be no more Bill of Rights. And as John and Nisha points out in their book, Battlefield America, The War on American People, and its fictional counterpart, the Eric Blair Diaries, there will be no more freedom in America as we have known it. And a lot of people say that there probably hasn't been for a long time anyway, and that's all an illusion anyway. And they may be right, but really, they're working on even more censorship, and we've seen it. And again, I had someone at a trade show last week ask me about, they're really censoring the left? Yes, they are really censoring the left too. 100%.
Start censoring first.
Well, I think it started with Alex Jones, and he's not really on the left.
Right.
And then they started coming for who was the one? Owen Benjamin. They started coming for him.
Yep.
And knocking him off. They started coming for a lot of people, and then it just became anyone that gets mass reported on Twitter.